So we have nervous and hormonal control of digestion at the stomach, which actually influences the small intestine and the large intestine as well. So when we look at the nervous control of digestion, if you have taken classes previously, you might remember that we have the autonomic nervous system. And this is what generally is controlling things like breathing rate, heart rate, but also digestion. It plays a role in digestion. So the parasympathetic division of this contains a really important nerve that you might have heard of, which is called the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is actually a nerve that comes off of your brain. It's a cranial nerve, and it goes out down as a vagabond. The vagus nerve travels to different parts of the body, including your intestine, your digestive system. So the vagus nerve tends to be stimulatory. So it stimulates the stomach to churn. It stimulates the release of gastric juice. So it's stimulatory. Now, the sympathetic nervous system can actually override this. So it is your flight or fight division, flight or fight. And so the sympathetic nervous system actually is inhibitory to digestion. So this inhibits digestion. And there's not one single big nerve coming out from the spinal cord, for example, but it just inhibits it. And so I oftentimes say, when people want me to go to a business meeting where there is food, right? If it's a very stressful business meeting, you don't want to eat because you'll just sit there and you'll be stressed out, sympathetic nervous system, and you won't be able to digest, and the food just kind of sits like a lump in your stomach. So it's very hard to digest when you're in fight or flight, which was one of the reasons why, for example, my brother, when he lived with me, if my children were fighting and we were fighting at the dinner table, he would just get up and walk out because he couldn't handle eating when there's fighting at the dinner table, right? So finding a nice, calm place to eat is probably the best idea. So that was just a interlude there. Okay, so let's look at an image that shows the different stimulatory effects specifically on the stomach. So these come in phases. So the cephalic phase might just be smelling somebody cooking dinner, right? And maybe you even might taste something. And what this does is this stimulates your vagus nerve that then goes in and stimulates specifically your stomach to start moving, your stomach growls, and it also starts to produce gastric juice. Okay, so that is stimulatory. If you have stress and you have an decrease in the parasympathetic nervous system, that is going to inhibit that. So if you're stressed out, you might not feel like you're hungry, you might have a loss of appetite, you might be depressed, right? Or even if you're fall in love, sometimes it's hard to eat, right? Okay, so here we have the gastric phase. The gastric phase is when the stomach gets food. And so it gets big, right? And this activates stretch receptors in your stomach. So you can tell when your stomach distends, right? So this actually sends a reflex, right, via the vagus nerve out to the stomach, which causes an increase in secretion and motility. And then just having food in your stomach can also increase the stomach secretion. Okay. Sympathetic nervous system would be it overriding the parasympathetic nervous system, making it very hard to digest your food. So emotional stress, for example, can cause a decrease in your stomach. Intestinal phase. So this can have a brief effect on your stomach. So if your intestine senses that there are partially digested foods, like they needed to be better digested by the stomach, then it can actually send a release a chemical which actually influences the secretion of the gastric juice. And so these would be examples of, we just talked about the nervous system, but now we're going to talk about the hormones. Okay, so you'll notice here that there is a hormone called gastrin. How fortunate, it's called gastrin because gastro means stomach. So you can easily remember that gastrin is released by the stomach. It is produced by G cells, which are gastrin cells, right? Gastrin producing cells. And these G cells actually are part of our gastric pit, our gastric gland, and they include these cells that are called enteroendocrine cells. So hormonally, we have enteroendocrine cells. And you'll notice that they're near the parietal cells and the chief cells in our gastric pit. These include G cells that produce gastrin, and this increases secretion and motility of the stomach. So it is stimulatory for digestion in the stomach. Interestingly, there are other hormones that are released by the stomach, and these include, so we have hormonal control, right? So we have gastrin as being an important one, but we also have serotonin. It's really strange, but I read that 90% of your serotonin is actually associated with your digestive system, even though it's a super important neurotransmitter in your brain, which is one of the reasons why they think there is this connection between your gut and your emotions. But serotonin has the function in that it causes contraction of the stomach muscle. There is another neurotransmitter or hormone that is produced, which is called histamine. And you're like, histamine, isn't that an allergic reaction? Yes, but it is also produced by your enteroendocrine glands, and histamine increases HCl production in the stomach. So it makes your stomach more acidic. So sometimes they write histamine as H2. So we could talk about H2 blockers. So you might, if you have excessive stomach acid that they think might be causing gastric ulcers, for example, you might go on an H2 blocker, which is different than a proton pump blocker, but it is going to block the release of histamine in your body so that your stomach acid will increase in pH, so it won't be so acidic. So these are just some of the examples of how hormones, in this case, these are actually secreted into the digestive tract and actually influence the cells near them. So these influence cells located near them. And then the gastrin can actually also make its way into the blood. And so it can travel via the circulatory system. So it is more of a hormone that is secreted that can be absorbed and then pass into the circulatory system.